Neighbors, monitoring your neighbors, you told them what you agree with or what you disagree with, and we'll be ready in a moment to have questions and answers. And you'll see there's a standing mic there. Well, there'll be a standing mic up here too, but there'll be the mic that you can go to ask your questions. And I encourage you to ask questions and not make speeches. So just a little preface if necessary. But please try to come straight to the point of your question, and Michael Molloy will do his best to respond. So, Mr. Molloy, please, and people come to the mic, ask your questions.
I'd like to ask a question about, of course, the two-state solution is what we're looking for, the two capitals. How are you proposing the division of Jerusalem for the two capitals? I'm assuming Jerusalem will be the capital of both states, and there'll have to be some division within that.
Yeah, it's a terrific question, and just let me try something. Yeah. This gives you a sense of how complicated it will be. This is what's called the napkin map. It's the map that Omar showed to Abu Mazen, but wouldn't give him, so Abu Mazen scribbled it on a napkin. And the white spots are, anyway, it doesn't matter. You see how complicated the geography is. And in addition to which, if you go up beyond Valley of Mean, if you go another half kilometer, you drop to the lowest point on Earth, right? So, I mean, Jerusalem sits like this, and then drops to the Dead Sea. And you probably, you've been there, the way it's all kind of. The interesting thing is that the settlement activity in Jerusalem in general makes the business of two capitals more and more complex, and deliberately so. But to this day, and I work very closely with a couple of Israeli lawyers who do a lot of work on problems. Up to this day, you could actually pull out I think it was just a second. The Palestinian areas are the gray areas, and the light blue over there, of course, is West Jerusalem. And then you see the purple things of the settlement. They're separate. And they're separate not only in terms of this way, but in terms of the tremendous ups and downs. And a couple of years ago, an organization called IPRI, I think you may have heard Christian Basson speak here about 2 months ago. They sat down and said, if you had to create two capitals, and the one side or the other insisted on a wall, where would that wall go? And it is very possible to actually separate the two communities with a fair wall, but a very complicated wall, with lots of doubts. You end up with two islands. Well, you end up with an Israeli island in one place, and you end up with a Palestinian island. I think what the Palestinians are really keen on, more than anything else, is this section behind the old city. When you see the dark yellow and the light yellow surrounded by the red and white dot line, that is all heavily Palestinian, and that would be the core of the Palestinian capital there. Now, the other thing has been interesting. It's quite interesting. Is that a lot of the surveys that have been done in Israel, where they break down what people are attached to. There's a tremendous attachment, of course, to Western Jerusalem and the Haram and the Wall. But Israelis don't go to a lot of these other places. And so you would end up with a wall that looked like, spaghetti on absolutely bad. But it's still doable. 2 or 3 years from now, it might be possible. But for the moment, you can actually sort them out. The other thing that's really interesting, and perhaps quite sad, Israelis and Palestinians use one road in common. There is one freeway, and there's a 5-kilometer stretch where Israelis use it, Palestinians use it, Israelis get on it at certain places and get off at others, and the same with the Palestinians. But for the most part, people live very, very separate lives in terms of social life, in terms of how people move around. It's still doable, but you know, let the settlement thing go on check for the next 10 to 15 years. Well, your question may have a good answer.
Well, you said 10 or 15 years, but a moment ago you said 2 or 3 years.
Well, I've been told by one Israeli lawyer it's 3 years. I think it's probably a bit more than that. But it's you know, certainly if it continues, we're going to find that there's certain areas where there's still possible to record. The other difficulty for the Palestinians is, can you connect the capital to the rest of the West Bank, particularly the north? If you look at this map, if all those white areas go to Israel, there is no way to move north. Now they're talking about tunnels and overpasses and all sorts of things, and certainly those things are feasible. But the psychological impact of not being able to travel from one part to the other along a secure route for both parties, in fact, is a really big issue.
Thank you. Another question? Yes, stand up.
Okay, I came from a quite interesting group, because on my right was a Jewish individual, even at my left, a Palestinian born in Jerusalem, and then the Jordanian who had Palestinian roots. So it was quite a mediation, so I ended up representing that small group. Anyhow, so what came up from that discussion are a couple of points. The first one is, as time moves and this negotiation continues, Israel will continue performing illegal actions and taking even more land. And what we saw recently just in Sheikh Jarrah in Jerusalem, where some families were kicked out of their houses and settlers were moved in. So the situation is going to just become more complex. What appears easy at some point becomes more complex as time passes. So how will this proposal handle that situation? The second part that came from the discussion is, you draw the demographic with 4 distinct groups like Armenians, Christians, Muslims, plus Jewish. But then whenever there's a solution, it breaks it down as the Jewish and the Palestinians. So it doesn't seem that the Arabs exist there, because all the Palestinians are on one side, and the Jewish get the special status. So that's kind of also came to the discussion, and I'm not sure if that can actually end up working out. It doesn't handle the demographic reality or the demographic quality. So I think.
Okay, in terms of I'll go to your second issue first. Obviously the Christians and the Armenians see themselves as part of the Palestinian body politic, right? The quarters are just where people have lived historically. And in the old city, the balance of population is something less than 5,000 Jews and something around 30,000 Palestinians or Armenians. There is nothing to be said in favor of trying to move anyone out. But I think it's one thing that we understand very clearly is that if everybody feels secure, the building up of the Palestinian population will gradually go down. Those new people from Palestinians living there were driven in by the separation wall. Okay, so I think you have to, whatever the demographics are going on at the time when they finally get a peace treaty, then that's what you have to do. Now, there's a lot of people saying that nowadays the Clinton parameters, which were what neighborhood is Jewish, and what neighborhood is Palestinian is Palestinian, that's how things will be divided. Palestinians are now saying yes, but in the 10 years since Clinton made that pronouncement, the facts on the ground have changed, and they've changed tremendously. That's very dangerous, and it's as dangerous to the Israelis as it is to the Palestinians. Because anything that ultimately blocks peace is bad news for both in the long run. There's a certain sense that you get sometimes when you read the papers that the Israelis think that this kind of situation can go on forever. My old mother wasn't much of a diplomat. Once said, you know, you can do anything with bayonets except sit on them. And the Russians proved that. So I think there's great urgency, and one of the things that worries me is that with all the turmoil in the Arab world right now, it may be quite some time before the Americans are emboldened enough to move ahead. The other point, I'm sorry, it's fallen out of my head. Your first point, sorry.
The first point is you kind of addressed it in your comments towards the end, which is the situation is changing on a daily basis. Israelis are doing a little more violations. They're thinking of proposals.
I try to avoid being too political, but I spent 2 weeks in Jerusalem in June, and I would say this, that the Israelis are winning on the ground and losing in the world right now.
Excellent work going on, and you know, just as a reminder of some times together, what's it's possible to come up in this sort of practical product that you think quite rightly delineated was very helpful. You mentioned, of course, this is all contingent on a peace treaty, and I guess I would ask, given your background, I mean, there's been the direct talks between the parties, the U.S. mediated accords, there's been the Quartet, there's been the Madrid process, the multilateral. From your own experience with this, what do you think will be, in the end, the most effective vehicle for bringing about that peace treaty?
Well, if you look at past history, the most effective vehicles are a horrible war where both sides suffer and get tired of it and then move on. I mean, every major breakthrough has followed a period of extreme violence. I think there is no substitute for American leadership. But I think what the Americans sometimes miss, and certainly the Clinton team articulated it to us as they were leaving and we were beginning our work, what they miss is the fact that this problem cannot be lifted without the Americans, but they can't lift it by themselves either. And I think the Americans have made a big mistake in holding on to this too tightly themselves and not encouraging other initiatives. There was a brilliant period after the first Gulf War when they got the multilateral process going, and everybody who wanted a role in the world got a role. But that fell apart with Clinton, and it's never been brought together. I think there's something really ironic going on right now. Recent polls in February in Israel showed that while most Israelis now consider themselves to be on the right, the ideas about peace that they espouse are the ideas of the left. Most of those people on the right now say, we need peace, we need a two-state solution, and we're going to have to start with a 67 border as the place to go. Israeli population does learn, and learns quickly. But they don't want the peace made by left-wing leaders. They want the peace made by right-wing leaders. So that's one thing. There's been a shift. There's been a shift in Israel that's going on. In addition, there's a huge fracturing going on at the right wing, largely driven by the right-wing extremists. That's not to say that the left is coming back, but and there are some. I suffer from terminal optimism, but I think the next year is going to have some surprises in terms of that process. I think that one of the things that I, from my reading of the Israeli press, one of the things that they are beginning to grasp is that the changes of the Arab world, particularly the really important ones in Egypt and Tunisia, you've got Libya and you've got all these other things out. Those fundamental ones next door and then in Tunisia, change the game entirely. Because when you're dealing with democracies as opposed to despotic regimes that can hold their people down, it doesn't make things easier. And there is a window, and I think it's beginning to be perceived in Israel. There is a window that has to be closed. Now, This peace treaty, this peace process has been